next speaker is going to be Suzanne Moore. Suzanne Moore. I'm going to talk about her book on Coopersville called The Living Stone that she wrote.
Born and brought up her entire area, something she thought a lot about and something that we do too, because we love Old St. Joseph's Church in Coopersville, and Father Cody, the present, and Mr. Eddie Diesel, who a great friend of mine, who she researched and who was so happy to have her come. And so this is your time, Suzanne.
Thank you, Addie.
Okay.
Here are some things to look at in case you get bored while I'm speaking.
We're not going to do that. We're not going to be bored.
Down and four different pages out of the book. Yeah. I almost feel like I'm speaking to a bunch of friends here because I know so many of you. And I have to say it's a pleasure to speak to Joe Schwinier when he's not forced to converse in a whisper. I think that's the first time I've talked to him out of the library.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Take care. Okay. I got the book.
Oh, okay.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Come again when you can stay longer and I can see you more.
Yes. Yes.
There you go.
On.
Thank you for coming. I'm going to have to look at you the whole time, man. Don't get embarrassed.
Okay.
Don't forget what the Ellie told you.
Talk loud.
Speak loudly. That's something I can't do very well. I tend to speak with my mouth shut. In 1994, one night, I was sleeping peacefully, and my husband came home from his parish council meeting and woke me up and said, "We're going to have a 150th anniversary celebration for the church, and they want to have a book to commemorate it. Guess who's going to write it?" he said. I was kind of tired, so I didn't throw anything at him. But I wasn't really too thrilled because when I thought about writing about a church, I imagined very dull facts, one after another, that would put people to sleep. But being a writer and having a chance to be published, I can really say no. So after, for a couple months, we had a lot of things coming in, pictures and news clippings and other bits of memorabilia that people had collected for years about St. Joseph. And I started to get everything together. And I guess I should tell you, for those of you who don't know, St. Joseph is in Coopersville, which is a hamlet in the town of Champlain between, well, kind of Shazy and Rouse's Point. It used to be a thriving center of industry in the early 1800s. Ebenezer Cooper settled there, started a sawmill and grist mill and various other enterprises, and it was quite a bustling little community. And St. Joseph's Church was built. The first one that we can actually verify was in 1818, and it grew from there. So I had to go back quite a ways with my research, and here we were piling all this stuff up that people were bringing in. And in late July of that year, we had Bob Venne, who's standing behind the camera, and Calvin Castine come to the church, and they must have spent 3 or 4 hours videotaping the history. And the timing was a little wrong because at that point I learned the history from what people had given me. I hadn't had a chance to really research things, and there are some errors, I hate to say, in that videotape. At the same time, Laverne Dutcher from the press covered the anniversary, gave us a beautiful full-page spread. And because of this publicity, we received several more interesting items. One of these came from Phyllis Wells in Plattsburgh, who's a historian in her own right. She's currently researching all the churches in Clinton County with plans to write a book about all of them. and she called me and said she had a picture of the church with a steeple fallen off and stabbed down through the roof. And I said, well, that can't be St. Joseph's. I never heard about that. And she said, at that point, I was under the illusion that if you didn't hear about it, it didn't happen. And she said, oh yes, it was Coopersville. Want me to mail you the pictures? And I said, well, yeah, great. But the problem was she didn't know when this had happened. So here we were packing up for our annual camping trip in Ontario, and I had these pictures and no time to go to special collections and try to research them. It was very frustrating. But I brought all my research with me, a couple of boxes full, and while everybody was out hiking and canoeing, I was sitting by the fire freezing because it's cold in Ontario in August, sorting through everything. I was trying to catalog the information I had according to the priest who was serving at the time. And I picked up my copy of Charles Hancock's journal, which you probably all are familiar with and read. Peg Barcombe from Rouse's Point had transcribed it a few years back, the highlights. Marie's going to finish that.
Oh, yeah.
So he was not a Catholic. He lived in Coopersville and owned a store on the corner, which has since burned. His big hall up over the store was the place that the Catholics would congregate for parties and festivities and clam chowder suppers and things. And so I'm reading through, and here are little references to the Catholics here and there, and all of a sudden I found it, 1904, February 28th, and you have the page there, I think. In his journal, he recorded. He said, this afternoon it was very bad. The south wind blew very hard and the snow flew. It blew hard enough to blow the steeple off the Catholic church here, and it went through the roof of the church. And imagine how excited I was when I read that. And here I am, 7 hours from home, 20 minutes from a phone, and the chipmunks I told this exciting news to weren't interested at all. At that point is when my project caught fire. And that's a good analogy because there are so many fires at the church over the years. At that point, I was, I guess what happened was when I wrote it down here. Let's see if I can say what I'm thinking. The contemporary report of the steeple falling through the roof brought this whole history to life for me. So all of a sudden I'm realizing that I'm not writing about a building, I'm writing about people. And that was a big turning point. And from that point on I couldn't stop researching it, and I had a fabulous time. My first big experience in researching history took place a couple years before the church project. I decided that I was going to enter the McMaster's competition, and for my topic I picked a cholera epidemic from the 1830s that I read about in Heard's history, and I went to see Joe at Special Collections, and he taught me how to find things. I really had no idea what I was doing. I had a little writing experience and a lot of curiosity, and I learned some big lessons during that project. I didn't win the prize, but that just means I have to keep entering until I do. So anyhow, one of the things I learned with the cholera history was that you cannot depend on recent writings to verify facts from long ago. You have to get as close to those facts as you can. In Heard, the name of the doctor who wrote about the cholera incident, when I looked him up at Special Collections, I discovered that Heard had his middle initial wrong. And I was thinking, well, gee, if I got a middle initial wrong, it's not a big deal, but what if there are other things that are incorrect? So it taught me that I better trace things back to the source. And I'm just telling you people something you all know, and if you're sitting there saying, well, duh, of course you are. Of course you do. But that was something that I had to learn. And I have, incidentally, I've noticed in that book there are many errors in that book. That was written in the 1870s, I believe. And when you look at St. Mary's Church in Champlain and St. Joseph's in Coopersville, there are a lot of fallacies that somebody, I think what's happened is people tell stories and tell stories and tell stories, and it's like that game we played when we were kids, the telephone chain, when you tell the story at one end and whisper it to everybody else, and if you get to the other end, it's not what it started out as. And that's a problem when you're trying to really document something that happened in the past. As a reporter, as a journalist, I've always been very conscious of the fact that you can't just write for today. You have to keep in mind that what you've written is there for years to come. And if you make a mistake now, that mistake will be perpetuated. And so when I started with the historical stuff, that was something I kept in mind, that there could very well be mistakes in the writings from the very beginning. Take poor little Ina Fozier, for example, in Coopersville, who in 1934 saw lightning strike the church, and she ran down and went inside, and with embers falling all around her, she saved the Holy Eucharist. Well, in the newspaper the next day, it said that her sister Norma saved the Holy Eucharist. And every single writing about that fire since that time, except one, said that Norma Fozier saved the Holy Eucharist. And poor Ina, she was kind of left out in the cold, and I just hope the man upstairs reads my book instead of some of the other reports when she goes up there for her final reward.
Norma was about 4 years old.
Well, Norma was too scared to go outside, she told me. So she didn't.
She was too young.
She wasn't down there. So there's just one example. That happened immediately, and that reporter should have gone to the family and said, okay, which one of you did it? Let me flip through here a little bit. So I'm not saying that my history book is without flaws, and if you know of any historical facts that are wrong, just come whisper them to me afterwards. Don't put it on camera. But if you have a copy of the book and you flip it open to the introduction, would you please take a pencil and correct the spelling of the word brilliant? That was one brilliant mistake I made right at the end when I was in a hurry to finish up. So I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but I am saying that I did try very hard to make sure everything was accurate. It was the biggest challenge writing the church history was separating myth from fact. Part of the problem was that, and is, people love their church so much, and when someone grows up thinking that their church dates back to Samuel de Champlain's visit here in the early 1600s, and you tell them, no, it doesn't, it kind of bursts their bubble. And there were stories circulating that gave you the idea that Champlain sailed up the Great Chazy, parked his boat, and built a church. I couldn't verify that, so I didn't write that. I couldn't. Complicating the whole issue is the fact that a priest named Father Pierre de la Valinière built a little church at Trembley's Bay, which is in Chazy now, that Chazy hadn't been formed then. Now, here's the big dilemma, and you can decide if I handled this properly or not. North of Plattsburgh to Canada and west to Malone is this huge area. There is one little church there in Trembley's Bay. So the congregation, technically, for that one little church is that whole area. Well, a couple of years after he built that church, since he was kind of an antagonistic sort of fella, his neighbors burned this church and his house down, and he left. So, yeah, he got the message. A few years later, a little church is built in Coopersville, actually quite a few after the War of 1812. Now that church is the only church in this great big area which has the same congregation that the earlier church had. So if you want to stretch things, you could say that the first St. Joseph's Church was in Trombley's Bay, and it just moved. And then it had this continuous history right through the present. And to me, that really was stretching it a little bit, because he just kind of set that church up in Chazy on his own, and kind of left on his own, and that was that. So I couldn't call that St. Joseph's Church. I just couldn't. The idea that this was the first St. Joseph's Church, except for that one Champlain built, was perpetuated a great deal because in the 30s and 40s there was a priest in Coopersville named Father Hermenegilde Brisson, whose brother George was priest in Chazy for a time. He was an accomplished publicist. He was in a tough spot because the church had burned in 1937, and he needed to pay for the reconstruction. There was quite a bit of money, although it was rumored that bootlegging money paid for it. I don't know that for sure either. So anyway, he had to pay off the debt, and he evidently was interested in the history of the church. I'm not sure that he was interested that it was correct or not, because he issued many press releases and told many stories about how old it was. And during the 100th anniversary celebration, he had a ceramic trivet made that had a map on the back showing where Coopersville is, and it gave all the dates for the church dating back to 1609, I believe. So when a priest tells you something about history, you tend to believe him. Perhaps he was right. Maybe it did go back that far. Maybe he had the documentation, but he made a very big mistake because he didn't keep track. He didn't let us know what that documentation was. And so even if you're right, if you can't document it, you don't know if you're right. Nobody knows if you're right. So you'll notice there is no bibliography in my church book. That is because of a lack of space. We were allowed 200 and something pages, and it was either cut a lot of the history and put the bibliography in, or keep all that in. And I prefer to keep it in. So what you'll find, it's inconvenient, but you will find references all through the book telling where the information came from instead. And Bob Venne he did an index for the book while he was lying on his back in the hospital last spring, I think it was. Bob, was that when it was? Last fall. He, yeah, it's Murray's fault. He wrote an index and brought it in, and he has it on disc, and we would like to make that available to people who would like to stick an index in the back, because that also was cut out because of space. Where am I? Sometimes historical details seem so blatantly obvious that you fail to look into them to make sure they're correct. And in Coopersville, there's one really blatant bit of history. When you look at the church, there's a cornerstone that says erected in 1844, but the church was actually built in 1845. So here we were celebrating the 150th anniversary in 1844. We were a little early, but that helps me out because the book didn't come out till 2 years later. And I noticed for myself that sometimes you want something to turn out a certain way in the history, and you can actually fool yourself if you don't watch out. For example, Father Louis Lepic was the priest at the time when the church was built, and he, in one of his record books, he wrote out a contract in English and one in French that for all the materials that were needed for the construction. And there's a date at the top, and it looks like it could be 1843 1843, or it looks like it could be 1845. Well, since the cornerstone said 1844, and you would assume the contract would be written before the construction, it's easy to think that that says 1843, and that's what happened with a little history that was written in 1976 about the church. But if you go a little further and compare his handwriting throughout the book, and of course he has his baptisms and deaths and everything listed by date, if you look at the way he makes his threes, you realize that there's no way that that date is 1843. It has to be 1845. So my conclusion is that somebody was a little overly optimistic when they ordered the cornerstone and had the date put on, because there were little problems that must have happened and prevented the construction until 1845. So there's another little lesson in historical research. Again, something you don't need to hear, I'm sure. Another bit of misinformation that I discovered while I was researching this concerned a missal that was presented to Father Brisson soon before he died. You have a paper for this too. Father Brisson presented this missal to Wadhams Hall Seminary, where Father Cody a couple years ago found it displayed under glass, very nicely preserved. And it's a very old missal, which was evidently printed in 1657. And the gentleman who gave it to Father Brisson told him that it had been once used in Coopersville, that it belonged to Anne, the oldest daughter of James Fenimore Cooper, the author. Now, being local historians, you probably know that Ebenezer Cooper did not found Coopersville, that he never even lived in Coopersville, that there wasn't a daughter. Did I say Ebenezer?
Yeah.
I mean to say James Fenimore. That there was no daughter Anne that lived in Coopersville. That one time we were stopped by the police for something. For the camera, I'll say it was all a mistake. The trooper said, "Where do you live?" And we said, "Coopersville." And he said, "Oh, I've been to the Baseball Hall of Fame." So you can see how easily that this can be confused. The book ended up in the wrong town, unfortunately. So here this book has been on display and has been treasured, and of course it should be anyway because of its great age. But it was all a mistake. It doesn't belong to Coopersville, and it was never used in Coopersville. And I'm sorry, because I wish I could have written that James Fenimore Cooper was in Coopersville and that this book was here. So it just goes to show that you just really have to be careful. It's easy to take a misstep when you are doing historical research. It's a responsibility that is it's a weighty responsibility. If you're going to put something in writing for the generations to come, you really want to make sure it's correct. And I hope that I've done that to a high degree in the history book. I know I could not have done any of it if I had not had the resources that I've had, like special collections with Joe's help and Marie's help at the historian's office here, and Leon and Bob Venne, who came and brought me pictures and offered me information. The list goes on forever. And the other thing about the book, aside from the facts that you want to make sure are so correct, as I mentioned at the beginning, it was the people who got me interested in writing the book. So therefore, I knew that the book had to include the people, or people wouldn't be interested in reading it. And so you will find in the book a lot of anecdotal information. Certainly some of the stories might be a little changed from the way they originally happened, just because human memory is not perfect. But you know that there's stories that people are telling when you read it. And it's those stories, I think, that really bring the book to life. So, in conclusion, I guess what I have to say is that historians have a huge job, and it's not one that is. Knowing how much historians are paid in these towns to do this huge job, certainly not proportion to the responsibility that is on their shoulders. And I really salute anybody who puts in their time for such an important cause. As a footnote, I'd just like to bring up a new little topic that sort of fell in my lap this week. Yesterday, I stumbled on a piece of information that someone else had been looking for very hard and did not find. I guess it's Murphy's Law that the minute your book is published, you find that bit of information you needed. As a reporter for the Press Republican, I've been given an assignment to write about a movie star named Jean Arthur. Could I see a show of hands? Anybody who remembers movies by Jean Arthur?
You can get her birth certificate in Plattsburgh, I gave once.
I don't want to date myself.
Yeah.
Amazing. No, that's okay, you can get them on
Her
video.
name wasn't Jean Arthur.
No, it wasn't, because the first book about Jean Arthur was published just recently, and Jean Arthur was born in Plattsburgh, which Marie, how did you know that, Marie?
Well, a man from California called me and asked me if I would get her birth certificate. And I went to the city hall, and they told me I couldn't have it. I said, oh, yes, I can. I told the wrong one no, and I got it.
Because the author came to Plattsburgh looking for her birth certificate. And he went to the house where she was born. He knew that. He knew she'd been born in Plattsburgh. When she was famous, she said she was born in New York City. It was
Well, nobody knew where Plattsburgh was.
That's true.
Where Casey is now.
That's right. Well, anyway, he came to Plattsburgh. He tracked down this information from school records in Maine, and I think her death certificate mentioned Plattsburgh. And he came and he tried to find her birth certificate, and he couldn't. And he wrote the book without the birth certificate. And when I talked to him on the phone the other day and read the book, I realized that he kept saying town of Plattsburgh, town of Plattsburgh. And I thought, well, maybe he didn't realize that there's a city of Plattsburgh, and when Jean Arthur was born, it was a village. So I called the city clerk, and within 4 seconds, he said, oh yeah, here's the entry right here. And when I talk to this man, he is going to be so upset. I could just imagine it, because if I missed a big bit of information for the church book, I would be just sick about it.
The man that wrote the other book, I did get the information.
You did, so...
I don't know, her name wasn't Arthur.
No, her name was Green.
Green, yeah.
And the man who wrote this new book thinks her name was Gladys Green. But her birth certificate says Anna Green. So this man researched this book. You can see how much work he put into the research, and unfortunately he missed this vital little bit of information. And I'm sorry that I'm going to have to be the one to tell him that. But she lived on Oak Street, and evidently didn't have fond memories of Plattsburgh because she never talked about it. So.
She left very young. You know the Dreams taxi or something that was down there? That was her relatives.
Oh, really?
Bootlegger, two ladies?
Yeah, would be, because a lot of the Greens stayed in Plattsburgh.
She had several brothers.
Yeah.
So there's just one more little proof that it's very important to research carefully, and unfortunately it's very easy to miss out on stuff that you wish you could find. So thank you very much. I would like to open the floor for questions if anybody has anything to say.
You
Yes?
mentioned if your book is available and where you can get it.
Well, thank you for allowing me to say that. The book is available right here. It's $10 a piece, all of which benefits St. Joseph's Church.
Autographs to letter.
And so if anybody's interested, I do have a whole pile of them here.
How many do you think you had left?
Not very many. Maybe,
100?
no, maybe
No.
40.
Is that right?
Even 30. We had a printing of 700, and we had a lot of them pre-sold, and they've really gone well.
I've got a few open copies too.
Marie has sold about
So good.
a lot of them. She sold a lot of them. One of the reasons, it's not just a story for people from Coopersville, because so many people came to that church. It was the only church. So from St. Joseph's Church came Sacred Heart and Shazy, and the Church of Scioto, the Moores, St. Mary's, and Champlain, and St. Patrick's and Rouse's Point, and so there are a lot of family names in there. In fact, Marie and Leanne helped me to decipher a list of confirmation students in the early 1900s, which I just put in order to, because people maybe would find something of interest there.
St. Joseph's also had a lot of baptisms and so on. This is something people forget.
That's
from
very true.
The islands, Grand Isle, Alamotte area, Alberg area, because there was no Catholic church over there, and this was the closest one, so that some of your early baptisms and marriages and records actually are people who lived in Vermont, not in New York State at all.
That's very true. The very early records in the late 1800s up to 1843, I could not trace anywhere. We even went into Quebec to Chambly to see if they might be there, but we had no idea. I had always thought that the Catholic Church kept very good records, and I found that I was very wrong.
Unfortunately, it may be the next church without a pastor.
That's true.
And that's no blame on your book.
That's true. Bob?
A lot of those records were kept in Latin, right?
Yeah, there are several years that are in Latin, several years that are in French.
And poor handwriting.
I don't have a question, but
I have two other things. Excuse me, Bob. I didn't. One thing that I was thinking as you were talking about the cornerstone, it is possible that construction started in 1844 and didn't get completed until 1845, unless you found records to indicate otherwise.
Well,
sometimes it took a long time to build these buildings.
Sure, I'm sure it took a long time. But the contract for the materials was not drawn up until 1845.
The cornerstone may have been purchased and even put in place the year before, even if they didn't do the rest of the building.
Well, the other problem was in March of 1845, a committee of Catholics wrote a letter to Assemblyman Julius Hubble asking for the donation of a site for a church, and which seemed to indicate that they didn't really want to rebuild in Coopersville. They wanted something nearer to population, a larger population. And so they said in the letter, if you do not give us a site, the church at Corbeau, as it was called then, will be torn down, which I'm sure it wasn't the stone church. I don't think they would have built it and then torn it down. It was the wooden church that was there at the time. So I think it definitely started in sometime 1845. But I think maybe somebody did order that cornerstone. Yeah, it was something like that. And also some of the land wasn't even given until that year.
I have one other thing. I have to go get the paperwork, which is over by Marie. So Bob, why don't you go ahead?
I don't have a question, but I have an example of how something can be misunderstood. I was in the Champlain Bank, the Q Bank in Champlain last week, and they have a picture of Alexander Hamilton on the wall, and I was admiring it, and when I mentioned that to the bank manager, she insisted it was a picture of George Washington. So I figured if a bank manager doesn't know what George Washington looks like, anything's possible.
A lot of difference.
Well, we could ask Bob, because I think he was here then.
There's no film in this camera.
I know one little bit might get cut
No
off.
tape.
I don't know why you want to show me talking again, because everybody keeps telling me they see me on Channel 21 all the time. I think they're getting sick of this. So you might want to just wipe out all of this talk.
Sure put good articles in Plaster Facebook, they'll be very interesting.
Thank you for coming.
It keeps the interest of the article, especially the cat there.
That's Bob's cat. You know, it was because of Bob that cat became famous. He's the one who wrote the letter to the White House for the cat.
Is there anything in the book about the church hall?
Yes. You remember the church hall? I think everybody in the area went to that church hall for square dancing and chicken
There were
suppers.
2 fires at the church, right?
Yes. As far as we know, 2 fires. And the rectory burned in the early 1900s. And the hall, they were taking the hall down because it was unsafe.
Yeah.
And then they ended up having it burned by the fire department as an exercise, which maybe you remember.
I remember I was young, we used to go down there till they have the harvest dinners down there, and then there were dances down there.
It's amazing how many people remember that. They really had a good time. Before television came in, those kind of gatherings were so important to people, weren't they?
Ice cream socials.
Ice cream
Yeah,
socials.
yeah, we used to go down those harvest dinners. Dawn, you must remember that.
My great-grandmother took my father when he was about 6 years old to one of the events at the church, and she gave my father a dime, and he played some game, and he won a set of sheets, brand new sheets for a bed, and my great-grandmother took them away from him, which he didn't think about. He didn't care anyway. But when my father got married, my great-grandmother gave him back those sheets that he'd won at the St. Joseph's Hall. That was pretty cute. Did you think of it?
Okay, I've got what I wanted. What I have here, which I brought up for other purposes, but it just happens to fit in, is a narrative. Oh, it's not in good condition. No, that was already loose. This is a narrative of family and local history written by Moses Leonard Stearns of Rouse's Point in 1898. And he was then about 84 years old. I found this in the bottom of a box of books and miscellaneous stuff that was at Rigsby's auction, probably 10, 15 years ago. It was out of the estate of, I believe, his daughter or granddaughter. I think granddaughter, probably. It's very interesting. I'd like to see it published. That does not mean that everything in it is totally accurate, but there is a story in here that relates to an incident and your father Lapique, who is spelled quite differently in here. Moses Leonard Stearns taught school for a while, and then later had a farm. I think we've located it. You've seen this before, and we did some work on it on the Hayford Road. I worked. Let's see here, where it starts. I taught. This is dated 1849. I taught, and I don't expect this, even though this was recollected by him. I'm not sure how accurate this is. But I do know that versions of this story have appeared in anti-Catholic literature that was published in the 1800s before. And Stearns, of course, was not a Catholic, and which will be very obvious. I taught at Coopersville on the north side of the Big Shazy River, had $17 per month, and board in one place at Antoine Blow. The place which once belonged to priest Dugar, D-U-G-A-R is the way he spells it. Blow married the daughter of priest Dugar's housekeeper, and he gave the place 40 acres of good land and a brick house to Blow's wife. The Catholic Society wanted he should give the place to them, but Blow refused. I think the Catholic Church turned Blow out of the church. Lepeki is the way they're spelling it here, capital L-A, capital P-E-K-I, but I think it's referring to Father Lepek that you mentioned before, being the priest. Old Mrs. Peter Luck was refused the sacrament by Priest Lepek for visiting Mr. Blow's people, and Mrs. Luck published it as much as she could. The Catholic priests from Canada, a short time before I taught the school, went to all the families of the Catholic Church and got all the Bibles they could find and burned them in what is now Blow's dooryard, a few refusing to give up their Bibles, E.T. Marney and Louis Ashline. And then over on the next page, he says the Bibles had been given to the Catholic families by the American Bible Society, so they would have been Protestant Bibles.
That is true. That was the Coopersville Corbeau, as it was known, made national headlines over that Bible burning.
The Luck Brother Construction, that Mrs. Peter Luck is
Yes.
their great-great-grandmother.
Of the
That's the Virgil Luck family that lived down there because Beekmantown being a 4-mile wide strip, all of Beekmantown's families were there too.
Now
They originated
here's
out of Shakespeare, though.
here's an example of something that I would have loved to include in the book, but I didn't find it. That's really something. See, that answers some questions about where Father Duda lived when he was at the in Coopersville. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Bob.
Don't you have all that Bible burning business in your...
Yes.
Yeah,
But I didn't know they were burned in Blow's courtyard, front yard. Yeah. There's a lot. The history of Beekmantown has a great deal about the Bible burning because one of the meetings took place there, and I found a whole lot of other stuff.
I was helping a family, I have helped a family, Marie knows about this too, a Supernaw family that has been doing research, and these people lived in Moores and Champlain and moved to Kansas in the 1860s. And the family was traditionally Baptist in religion, although they were definitely French-Canadian in ancestry. And they have a story in their family about the man who was a farmer here in Champlain and Moores, and lived over near Angelville, actually. That is a Bible burning story about this man having gone to Toronto and studied to be a priest, and then there was a Bible burning thing, and it turned him
Dick
against the Catholic
Ward
Church.
speaking.
And they've never no way there's no, all indications are that despite that story, this Supernaw never went to Toronto or lived or went to be a priest. But it is possible that somebody could have taken that Cooperville Bible burning story and blown it up into a legend that by the time the people got out in Kansas was quite different from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, evidently the bishop had an investigation conducted, and it does, according to their report, he appointed Catholics and non-Catholics to the committee, and they determined that a few Bibles got burned. Most of the families who got the Bibles couldn't read anyway, and that it was not as inflammatory a situation as it was reported throughout the country. But I guess it was just a time period when there was a lot of antipathy toward the Catholic Church. So, yes, sir.
Just as an aside, when I read your book and read about the Bible burnings, I thought that was pretty mild back in the 1840s, because down in Long Island, where I came from, they were throwing paving bricks at each other and there was blood all over the street.
So we were lucky there.
That's because they were Irishmen, not looking for
Any other questions?
This was Catholics against Protestants in Brooklyn.
Well, Suzanne, we thank you. You're one of Shazy's jewels. And when I found these books, when I searched out for books, I found this one, and I thought this newspaper woman should have this one. But you know, when we studied Latin, to go way back to our high school days, and we studied Latin, you remember the picture of Portia's jewels? All little children are jewels, but this is one of our grown-up jewels and so forth. But this is a jewel too. And I felt that as a newspaper woman, she would use it. But as you turn the cover, and it has this the contents are all of different areas, and they're segregated: Austria, Belgium, Canada, and has the Chapdelaine story in it. But as you turn the cover, and this is what got me to doing these books, because when I went downstairs and I saw, a book not to circulate, when it's on the shelf and no one chooses it, and they select the ones that didn't circulate, and this was one, and then they put them out. You must forgive me, but as we turned the cover, somebody offered it for 25 cents. And it was published in the 30s, you see, and it's almost 50 years old, but it is a jewel, and you are always going to be happy with this because, it's the sort of thing that Steve Menard would have liked. And sometime when you're caught a little short for something for the press,
Plagiarize.
Shan, for the record, you mentioned your dad. Tell us who your mom and dad are.
People ought to know by now.
Well, not everybody watching.
Ronald and Audrey Brown of Shazy. Dad is a former postmaster. Mom is known as Dee Dee, and she works in the guidance office at Shazy Central.
She looks as young as her daughter.
Yes,
That's right. She passes for my sister. In fact, I'm starting to look older than she does. Thank you.
Mr. Swinier is going to have to tell us how to do the other part. We're going to move to Marie's, and this is Shazy's gold mine. We're going to inspect.
What I'd like to do is I was looking at some Marie's collection the other day, and I'd like to talk about some general aspects about it. I was very impressed, both with the organization and the content. So I thought I would do that, and then another day to look it over, so I'd know what to say to you. And a number of things impressed me. One is that Marie and Leon have a sign-in sheet at the door, which is very necessary in a collection if you're going to have historical materials. Their artifacts are either locked or in glass cases, put away, so not easily picked up. The books are well organized. Their collection is succinct. It deals with their area, different general works on the history of the county, but they haven't attempted to have every dot and tittle, which is not appropriate for a township or village collection. You're dealing with a township or village in which you are. You don't need the whole state. And their collection is excellent. From that viewpoint, they have a great deal on Shazy and appropriate books on the surrounding area. I also think they've done a great deal with environmental safety for materials. As I said before, the artifacts are in glass cases. They have the shielding for the fluorescent lights so that they do not damage materials that are out. And also a very good point, when I first saw wooden bookcases, I thought, though I always worked with wooden bookcases because that's all we had, and we didn't have money to get others. But I know that all the current work on preserving materials, including books, says you don't use wooden bookcases because it does give off lignins, etc. There's various chemical interactions with the materials that are inappropriate. However, Marie must have read my mind because she stepped over one and here and she said, well, what we did, she said, we put Mylar over it. And I thought, gee, that's really sharp because I gave a workshop a while back on preservation on a shoestring. And I wish I'd seen that because that's an excellent idea. That's a very, very good idea. She's got very attractive cases They don't use a lot of wall space. They come out from the room, which gives her more space for the maps, other artifacts. Yet she's made use of what is really very appropriate for this room, though the wooden cases, yet they're treated with the Mylar. Another thing which I thought was very effective is I know when I worked, we always had sort of these general things. Old pamphlets on a topic, maybe a photocopy of a letter on a topic, some other printed things, and I just didn't know what to do with them. You know, were we going to like catalog each thing, which would take a year? Do you just chuck it into a file cabinet, which can be a problem of finding it? Well, I found that Maria and Leon have had a wonderful idea. They took various, I would call it like assorted material on topics, and they made a regular little library of folders over here. And I wonder if you folks could tell me about them. Maybe just take one as an example and show us how you worked with this. Because I thought this was a wonderful way to organize miscellaneous material.
Okay, historical office in town of Shazy.
When we moved from upstairs downstairs, we had just a lot of papers, and we really didn't know where to do or where to put the stuff. So we put them in categories. So like we have like Canada, we got the Shazy Public Library, like we have the Eastern Star, we have Essex County, we got post offices, we got railroads, we got Temperance Society. And we just categories.
Just pull one of those out, would you? Because I was really impressed when they showed me the variety of materials you pulled together there.
Well, like, let's pull a Temperance Society.
That's great.
So this is Leon's writing. So we took on the table, we put everything we could find in the Temperance Society. We put it all in this folder. We haven't indexed it yet, but we're still sorting and categorizing it. Someday, if I live long enough, I'd index it. Until then, if you want to know about the Temperance Society, you sit right here, you open this little folder up.
Read the book is in there where it's organized. Read 37.
And there it all is.
This is a wonderful setting. There's print materials, manuscript materials,
This one was
everything right
organized.
together in one package.
Any dates in that, Marie?
Yes, 1837.
1837.
1837, here's all the people who organized it.
160 years.
But so everything belongs to, we put it into a category.
This is excellent. 'Cause I see you've got some of the original books, some print material, or things have been transcribed also.
Old documents, which we will be putting in Mylar as soon as we get to it.
Right.
At
That's
least we have it
excellent.
all in one spot right now.
Well, right now we got all the different stuff all into one.
And there's another
Oh, yes.
group of materials also that I'd like to ask Marie to tell us about. Because I always used to feel, oh my golly, someone would bring this in a collection. You figure, are you going to bring it out right away? What do you do if you don't have it fully organized yet? And I know some places they just put it aside, it doesn't come out. We used to at least try to put something in the card catalog so people could get at it. But Marie was showing me some materials the other day here too, that they know what they have. They haven't had a chance to go through and list them. They haven't had a chance to go through and categorize everything.
We got military.
Okay.
So we got everything about the military and the American Legion and everything all in one. Civil War, Revolutionary War, it's all here in this cabinet. Someday. And we also have the Hancock diaries, which Dick would like to have, but I'm not going to give them to him.
I bet the type's good.
But we have Shane's book that she did. She gave it to us. And we also have the death records. This is junk. Right there's more diaries and scrapbooks. Mrs. Sullivan used to put stuff in scrapbooks. We worked 6 months before we know what SB 16 was, or SB 1 was. Well, we found out there was scrapbook number 1. What was that? And right here we have. Right here we have all the genealogies. And we have the Hubble papers, which date back to the 1800s. But also, those are all in categories also. You can leave those open if you want.
Ray, don't you think it's unusual that there's so many diaries in this area? I haven't had a diary in my group at all.
I don't have any diaries either, Marie.
Well, we got diaries. We don't even know what's in those diaries. We just know there's a lot of diaries, and we've got to go through because we got the Hancock pretty well, that's been done for
The
us.
nice thing is that they do have them divided though, because this is a big teaching aid, diaries for example. Well, this way if someone wants to come in, if they have the time, well, they can go through them. They're organized, somebody knows where they are, and you can get them down here on the table and work with them. Which is the advantage of doing a preliminary sort, even if you don't have a chance yet to list them all. She's got them organized so if you do want diaries, if you do want a certain family's papers, you can get at them.
And Shazy School's here, Minor Foundation's right there, and we've had 2 young girls that came in here and did the thing for the minor and they won county, and today they are at state at Rochester.
Beautiful.
By all our research, so I hope they win.
I bet they will.
And I noticed, go ahead, Susan.
Oh, no.
You continue, please.
I just want to say we had logs from the stores. We got Dick right in the corner here. It's a good place.
Wow.
All the behind also, and we have got one out here showing. You can tell who was here in 1880 or who was here in 1830 by going through some of these old books, day books.
Yes. And some of these are excellent ways to trace people
Yeah, the day.
who were not here for the census.
Sullivan, she had those?
Mrs. Sullivan had this whole, well, 98% of it Mrs. Sullivan had. But it needed a little organization. I have, this is the old book of commissioners of appointment to supervisors, Thomas Shazy. And this is,
Years.
yeah, I'm looking for the years.
Edith continued,
1879.
Edith continued her mother's work, though, of course, didn't she?
She didn't do it the last 14 years. They just piled up. I had 14 years of correspondence to answer. And I did it. It was done. I'm
And also thank you, Greta. I want to talk about continuing to write the local history. Because
This right here,
there's
though-
often a town history or village history. It
Leanne
needs
is
to be continued. Here's a
Leanne
good
is doing the
source.
pictures here.
And I think I jumped ahead, Marie, 'cause you've got the one where you do it year by year. There you
Here's
go.
the one I'm doing.
This is the one.
Okay.
I'm starting the town of Shazy, and I've got Shane's pictures right here. And I've got the pictures of the people when they put the new bridge.
And about the
And then I
minor,
keep, as they go in, you got the new town trucks, I put that in. Got the new fire
No, I
truck,
never thought of doing that.
new fire
Like
trucks,
an
and that's
everyday
the old and
history.
the new
That's right. Then if you go sometime to write,
fire truck.
like to update the village history
And
or
there's our
town
flood,
history.
well, here's
you've
when
had a
the
good source to start there
CFW
with it.
presented the flag, and I did that. And here's the flood we had last year.
Marie, are these
photographer in
special?
your family?
Are these special or?
You do the photography?
Yes.
Marie, are these special?
Yeah, last you get those at Sam's for $6.95 or $6.50 a box.
Right, but I didn't know if this
These
was
are
a special.
archival, according to Jeff Booth.
Oh, they are.
Yeah,
Top loaded.
Jeff.
the top. Well, he's
We know
I
Sarah,
know, we worked with
Yes.
Jeff.
We worked
Yes.
with Jeff.
Yes.
It
was last year.
and he's then this is of course over. Here's Fred's Folly over here. We call this. Next door kind of thing. So this is when they fix the slates on the top of the building, and I've got another book now. I'm doing the businesses in town. I'm just starting to keep.
I never thought of using this material. I think I'll change
And I also like to point out the Hollinger boxes, Asapri boxes for the storage of the manuscript materials, and that the fact that the cabinets can be locked. And I'm also going to give Marie a big hand. I noticed that anytime that they go out of the room, that the room is locked. And that is excellent, because you just don't ever know who's going to slip in and want some piece.
Ask Shan. She'll tell
Also here, the preservation of materials under the mylar, not really mylar, a type of plastic, which will not scratch, will not break, and damage the pieces as glass could do.
Special acetate too for these old pictures.
Yeah, that, no, it's Mylar.
That's my one.
And this is a modern way of keeping your records.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah.
Old Ben.
This is the bills where he had them at, this is like A, B, C, D, and so forth. And he kept them all like this in here.
Oh my God.
Huh? No, we had a general store.
Yes.
And could you tell us a little about your card catalog? You've got an extensive card catalog to a
I got
variety of materials.
10,700 cards. Every correspondent that Mrs. Sullivan ever did, she numbered that correspondent to a 3x5 card. So, and I'm doing my own correspondence for the past year right now. So if you go in there and you're looking for Joseph Blow, well, Joseph Blow, he may be on letter D 22. You go in that letter and you find a lot of stuff about him. You can't find it.
And is the indexing of the scrapbooks in the card catalog also?
Index of the scrapbooks, that's where we got the SPs. In the scrapbooks, it's
Use the Dewey Decimal System.
I used a Dewey Decimal System. I didn't know anything about it, but I read about it and I figured it out pretty well.
And I was also noticing when I was going through the show,
This is scrapbook 3.
in addition to noticing that the collection was really appropriate for the area, the fact there was a sense of organization too, using the Dewey Decimal System, getting like things together.
She cut stuff out of newspapers and glued it in every book. And then, like she'll say, and this is scrapbook 3, whatever page that is, it'll be, if there's John Letson, the card will be there, and you see scrapbook 3, page so-and-so.
Marie, is this the one where they glued on top of printed books that you have?
It's right up in there.
You show them that. That's very unusual. You didn't have scrapbooks, so you made scrapbooks.
The glue.
Well, the glue did that?
Yes.
Let's see, you can see here Stewart from Moore's, and I noticed that Letson was from Moore's, and
Look at, this is when you get an old book.
In that one.
I'm amazed at that pucker like
You
that.
take an old New York State education book and start.
Yes,
in it.
yes, yes. That's what they did with those education books.
Every name has got a card. So I got 10,000. I did what I did is a ruler count on them. Almost 7/8 of an inch of cards is 100 cards. So I measured my things. I got 9.5 inches of one drawer, and I just added them up. And
We know where you spend your time, don't we?
Lean and I spend a lot of time.
When are you open here? When are you open?
We're open here from 9 until 12, Monday through Friday, except when I get play hooky.
Afternoons you're not,
I'm not here generally, but I'm here by appointment.
by appointment.
Anybody wants to come in and see the material, just give me a call.
Any town supervisors that see this video, this is the way it's supposed to be done.
That's right.
Jack's recommend.
I'm willing to help any town either that needs help to get started. But I think every town should have a room, because if they can't go into the future without having something from the past.
Make sure that one is on.
I'll second that notion.
Marie also made a very good point the other day about being a caretaker for the records.
I'm only caretaker. They're not my records. They belong to the people of the town of Shazy. I'm only their caretaker.
I think that was a very good point. I think that was an excellent point you made.
Because behind you are some very important people from the town of
Mrs.
Shays.
Sullivan, she is the lady on the left, is the lady that did all the collections of all this material. And they used to say, well, she used to take a lot of stuff, but because she took it, we have it.
Good point.
But but sometimes she maybe forgot to give it back, but sometimes I do that too.
And people should make it clear if it's for a loan to be copied or if they're giving it to you.
Yes. And we had a general, if you notice, we had a general come out of Shazy and a colonel. And those two boys started out as buck privates.
Could we look around your collection for a while?
Be my guest.
So, are your pieces of display cases? Are they from Shazy?
The display cases belong to Julius Hubble, 1800s. Those are barrister cases. They're upstairs. They were painted dark green, dull green. Our very clever young maintenance man took them down in his shop, stripped them, and varnished them.
Gorgeous.
And repaired them. And some were pretty bad shape.
All the pieces like that.
Now that's a East Lake cabinet. That was the first one.
How many more?
And I think also
You have
another
some
very good
more of
point
those
here,
too?
Maria's mentioned this to me different times we've spoken, that she has very good relations with the board, with the town maintenance department, because she's had a lot of things refinished. This beautiful, I think you've probably got it somewhere else here, nice A-frame.
Well, it's out in the hall. I've
Yes.
put some materials on
That
it.
was made by the town infirmary.
And I have the two things out of the Shazy School, the desk and the mechanical drawing table.
Had Mrs. Sullivan
Minor.
No,
taken that, or?
no. That was, well, Mrs. Solomon obtained that, yes, when the school was so broken down. So material. We also have a letter from General Thurber here.
That's what I want to see. Now show me before I go.
You'll have to see the boss.
Well, About 2:13, the formal part of this day is over in the town offices in Chazy. My name is Bob Venne. This is a tape of the historians, county historian and town and village historians who've gathered here in Chazy. Donna Boyle, historian from the village of Rouse's Point, and the village of Champlain's new historian Marie Béchard for the village. And Addie Shields, the county historian, who's so good to all the people and knows so much about the county. Suzanne Moore, who spoke with us. Joyce Lavoie, who does a lot with the town records in Champlain and has completely and Ellie Martinson, her partner, who indexed all of the town records, sitting down here, and she's done some work over here with Marie. And of course Marie herself showing them all the new cupboards. So that'll be it from here at Chazy at 2:14. Thank you very much.